And then the Boston Children's Museum, which comes in at a mere $3 million. And this is a project that wasn't so much carved from scratch, but rather a project that was working on an existing waterfront piece of property that was probably one of the best pieces of property in Boston, but it was horribly, in just horrible condition. So this is the Boston Children's Museum. This is the site after we got our hands on it, and it was paired with an addition, a new entry into it. But you can see it just has this incredible position along Fort Point Channel, which pours out into the Boston Harbor. But this was it before. So they would let kids out to play on this, and they'd play on the steps and they'd draw pictures on the ground, but the end, there really wasn't too much for the kids to do. But the Children's Museum is a building for playful learning, right? Would you trust that kid with a knife? So this is the new lobby, and it has this amazing play structure in it, a kid catcher. And so our response was, okay, well, it has to be a landscape for playful learning. A lot of kids in the city literally do not get out of the city, and yet this is a huge magnet. They have a great program of letting schools come in for free so that they can, get engaged with it. But they had absolutely no outdoor space in one of the most beautiful parts of the city. So I wanted to break this down a bit. So $3 million sounds like a lot, but there was a lot of parsimony involved because we also had to fix the structure. So it wasn't that obvious in the existing, but basically from the face of the old building, you could go down about 5 feet, and then you'd go back up about 5 feet. So there was this big saddle of asphalt, and we looked at that and thought, something's not right there. And in fact, of course, the things were caving in because the seawall was not in very good shape at all. So a lot of that $3 million really went towards infrastructure. It didn't leave us a lot. And we realized that because we couldn't put much more weight on this already sinking landscape, we had to displace it with geofoam, a foam. We knew that the site was going to be fairly flat. And so it started to become a design issue of surface. How were we going to surface this in a playful way? And initially people said, oh, of course you're going to have primary colors, and it's going to be kids, but then we got to thinking, well, you know what, kids are really kind of sophisticated. They don't necessarily need primary colors in every venue of their lives. And, oh yeah, adults bring kids to the Children's Museum. So we need to make a place that is sophisticated to everybody. So we started by thinking about how we could make rooms outside that were just defined by the material under your feet. So so we have a maze over here. This milk bottle used to be right here. We had it moved and it was restored. That was a chunk of change too. And then there start to become these zones. So here's the carpet to the entry. Here's another area. There are garage doors that open up here. So that's another zone. This is another zone that holds the sculptures here, and still another transition zone. So it started to become this zone, and people would look at the plan and say, what are you thinking? What is that? People don't do that with materials. But we persevered. And what we ended up with is we couldn't afford a lot of expensive materials, and yet we were able to find a stone from Vermont. This is a stone that we had done in 2 different colors. The idea to have this kind of mosaic of different grays and whites, from black to white, came in, and we started looking for materials. Well, this stone from Vermont, our neighbors, was a mere, I think it was something like $5 a square foot. It was nothing. And to get another finish on it, added $1 a square foot. So that seemed okay. And then these are brick pavers, Endicott brick pavers, which have this great black. That's the dark color that you see. And then we also happen to have a marble quarry in Vermont. And so that's where that came from. And we discovered that if we could do it in small pieces and then play with the scale and the distribution of those, that we could start to create these carpets of change. And then we added another layer, which was that everything is a factor of 8 inches. So we could get these pavers, these were the drivers, we could get those in 8 inches, and then everything else became a division of that. So in this pattern, everything is 8 inches, and here you can start to see that the bricks are now 4, so there's 16 inches, and the pavers, these pavers start to stack up as well. So it started to be a game of, okay, how can we take materials, use them in the smallest dimension because they're cheaper, and make a design that always feels like it has some action to it and liveliness to it. So you can see that we also went to the other end where smaller pavers were kind of ganged up and made into those bigger spaces. And we did study after study of, what is this pattern going to be? What's going to, feel comfortable to people? And this is the cleaned up version. There are stacks and stacks of drawings in the archives. And so this is just a series of that. This is a different kind of sustainability. It's a resourcefulness, and it's a response to what the site can do. In other words, right away we knew what our limitations were. So how can we make it into a place that's exciting for kids to come to? And you start to see how these various carpets stack up next to each other and blend into things like the existing boardwalk. So it's not nearly as, a cacophony as one might imagine. It actually starts to divide up that space rather nicely, she says. And kids, instinctually come, and right away, they know what to do with the maze, right? They start running on it, they start following it. You see parents taking their strollers and following it because they're following the child. So it's this really fun place. And the Boston Children's Museum is just superb. And if you go there, whether or not you have kids or not, you should go visit. It's just an extraordinary place. But you can see, look at the view to downtown Boston. It's killer. So there's just a larger view of it. So we had things like, this is the stacking pyramid made for classes to come out or shows. And then we had a bit of intense nature. For a long time we called this the bento box because it had a little of this and a little of that in it. But for kids who really, and it's actually a wetland, so kids who really don't get out, there's a chance for them to kind of have a different kind of maze and a different orchestration of nature for them over the seasons. But we also had to have some resourcefulness in a different kind of stonework, the marble stacked boulders. We knew we wanted something sculptural in the project. We realized right away that we couldn't afford anything that we wanted. So it began here, where we were thinking about, geodes and how you open them, and there's this sense of discovery inside stone, and how kids, that might be really something fun for kids to think about. And we happened to be going to the Vermont quarries for another job at the time, and came upon this space and realized, wow, marble is pretty beautiful on the inside. And that's how the idea of using these big chunks of, frankly, waste marble could be used as stacked boulders on site. So this is our then intern, Meg, who forgot her tape measure and was resourceful enough, she went to Harvard, resourceful enough to use her body as a measurement. So she had somebody take pictures of her on every stone that she was interested in. And, you know, we called it, oh, that's 2 megs, that's 3 megs. And then we went to the quarry when it was, you know, time from Meg's markings, and we set them up on at the quarry, so we didn't waste money having them come down and playing with them on site. So they came by boat to the site. This is probably the most complicated structural piece, and we had to keep it really, really simple. So there are only 3 boulders, but they had to be on piles because of the subsurface conditions. And we went to the site, we'd have them, you know, position them. We had an idea from the quarry how we wanted them, and then we'd take pictures and, you know, make sure that we had it recorded because they had to lift them up to do the pins that went underneath them. And there they are in their almost done state. And they're just this wonderful kind of kid scale piece of geology for them to look at. They also help to define that space. So because we had no topography to play with, we looked at things like this to help create a sense of space and a little mystery. And it works all season long. The last thing I'm going to talk about is trees. We couldn't plant a lot because there was seawater below our feet. And yet we knew we wanted to have some kind of plants there. It's a very open site, it's windy, it's hot. And so we settled on willow trees because at meetings we would sit around and ask people, what's your favorite tree from childhood? And you know, probably 75% of the time, me included, it was willows. Everybody had a memory of being underneath a willow. So that's what we went with. But again, you know, as it is with landscapes a lot, there's so much more technology that you don't see below grade that has to go into supporting these kinds of plants in these kinds of environments. And so this is just to show you that there was a tremendous amount of thinking about how we could possibly sustain these trees. And in fact, we worked with the soil scientists and came up with a system where we set a minimum cubic feet of soil that would be needed for the tree in the long run. And then, you know, we couldn't use concrete boxes. They were too heavy. We wouldn't have the piles, we couldn't afford the piles to hold them up. And so we came up with this idea of making boxes out of the material that's used to cap landfills. So it's a very flexible material, and we just had them fabricate boxes for us. They thought we were crazy. But you couldn't have any seawater come in, right? And you couldn't let any roots out because people were nervous about that with the willow trees. And so there was a lot of detailing to figure out how to make perforations for irrigation to come in, how to let water out of the planter, but not let it back up in the planter. So this was a bladder. You're looking at it horizontally when in fact it's placed vertically. This is it as well. So that goes into each one. And it's actually pretty low-tech stuff. It's just using ordinary materials in a completely different way. So those were the design soils that went in. Trees had to be craned in because of the location of the project. And those are the trees last fall, actually. So they're doing quite well. They just gotten a haircut. We were hoping they would let us, you know, have them long, and at one point they were down here and kids would swim in and out of them, but they limbed them up. But they'll provide a tremendous amount, so you get a lot of power out of just 5 trees. That's literally what we could afford to put on site.